What's up guys, it's Kristen here today with my May wrap-up. So I don't feel like I necessarily had the best reading month in May because I only completed 4 books and I DNF'd 2 books, which prior to this I'd only DNF'd 1 other book this whole year, so that's always disappointing. And I'm sure you'll know if you watch my last few videos that I am tackling Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, that it is just over 1,000 pages and it's separated into 3 parts, so I'm reading 1 part each month, and I am really enjoying it so far, and I really want to not be so intimidated by large books and taking my time with them, but you know, you just don't get that same sense of satisfaction at the end of the month that you get to tick off that you finished it. In the last week of May, I also made a pretty big dent into part 2, so that's kind of part of my May reads as well. But once again, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is this very bizarre historical fiction slash alternate history slash fantasy book where it is set in the early 1800s during the Napoleonic War in England, and you know, Shakespeare's mentioned and the kings of England, but then there's also magic in this world, and not like Harry Potter where certain people know about it. It's just an established fact that everybody knows magic and fairies exist, and all throughout the book there are footnotes that reference these fantasy history books, so it makes you feel like this really did happen. And reading this, I'm kind of reminded of Game of Thrones, not in the story itself, but the way in which you are literally just dropped into this world. There is no hand-holding, there's no big exposition scenes. The story just slowly unfolds around you as the novel goes on. Also, there are a lot of characters, not as many as Game of Thrones, but a lot to keep track of, and they're not necessarily all connected right away, so again, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but that's something that I love and appreciate when an author doesn't underestimate the intelligence of their reader, and so far I am really enjoying it. Next up, I buddy read the Cuckoos Calling with Marie from Berg. She is an amazing booktuber, becoming a good friend of mine, so we had a lot of fun reading this. This is the first book in the Cormoran Strikes series by Robert Galbraith, aka J.K. Rowling, and we really enjoyed the first book, so we immediately jumped into the second book, the Silkworm, which I have to say I did enjoy the second book more than the first. These are murder mystery novels centering around the detective Cormoran Strike and his assistant Robin, and Cormoran is not like the typical James Bond, Sherlock Holmes, suave detective guy. He's very big and gruff and burly. He has had a lot of hardships in his life and he just can't seem to catch a break, but of course the one thing he is amazing at is solving these crimes which the police kind of dismiss offhand. Now with both of these books I really did enjoy the reading experience. I binged through them. They're very addictive and fast-paced, but my biggest problem, and Marie also had a problem with this and we talked about it a lot, is the fact that I think they keep the reader in the dark for way too long. It feels like you're not even given the chance to figure out the murder on your own. You know, I love in any murder mystery book or movie is that point at the end when everything becomes clear and you realize that the clues were there all along and you just didn't pick up on them, and you think, oh my god, how did I not see that coming? But with these books, I kind of had the opposite feeling when everything was revealed. At the end, I thought there is no way I could have ever put that together, which is also because, like I said, there are points when you are literally not even given the evidence. The book will say that Strike noticed something, but they won't tell you what he noticed. That aside, the reason that I really enjoy these books is because of the character of Cormoran and Robin and their interactions, which are a big part of the book, almost equal to the murder mystery itself, and that is the reason why I feel so invested in the series. I believe she said there's supposed to be 7 books in total, and Marie and I are probably going to read the 3rd book, Career of Evil, in the next month or so, and I'm very excited to get to it. Then I read Eleanor by Gurley, and I did a full review of this book, so I won't go into too much detail here, but essentially it is about a young girl named Eleanor, of course, and her twin sister dies when she is young, and that event just rips her entire family apart, and the novel is very much about the grieving process that her family goes through. But then when Eleanor is in her teen years, she walks through a doorway and is immediately transported to this other world, almost a dreamlike place. She'll be there for what only feels like to her a few minutes or a few hours, and when she comes back, she realizes she's been gone for days or months. At the same time, you're getting the perspective from these other creatures, alien-like people, I guess you could call them, and you realize that they are the ones ripping her out of the world. So this book was just a really interesting mix of literary fiction and magical realism, and a lot of it felt very science fiction-esque to me, which I absolutely love, and the writing in it is just gorgeous, so I highly recommend, especially if you're a fan of books like The Lovely Bones or The Time Traveler's Wife. This will be right up your alley. And then I continued on with the Fairyland series this month. This is the second book. It's called The Girl Who Fell Beneath Fairyland and Led the Revels There. I've told you I absolutely adored the first book in the Fairyland series that I read last month, and this one did not disappoint. It is just as gorgeous, and I know that these are technically middle grade novels, but I swear the writing is on the level of any literary fiction novel, and the themes in the book are very mature and thought-provoking, and I love that you're following September on this journey as she grows up. Though I must say I definitely did miss the fact that she did not go to the land of autumn in this book like she did in the first, but I still just cannot recommend this series enough to everybody. So now on to my two DNFs for the month. The first one was The Nest by Cynthia Dupree Sweeney. I know this book is getting like crazy hype. You can find a million 5-star ratings for this on Goodreads, but this was not the book for me. I literally only made it 20 pages into it, and I just could not do it anymore, which is so unlike me. Usually my kind of rule for DNFing is I try to make it halfway through a book, because then I feel like I could accurately judge it. I felt like I was reading a rough draft manuscript of a novel or something like that, because the writing felt so incredibly flat. There was absolutely no depth to the descriptions or the characters, and I could not bring myself to read literally one more page of this. And if you know my channel, I'm not usually this much of a hater on books. I try to find something positive in them, but I just could not for this one. And I was even supposed to buddy read this with my friend Joce, and I was like, I'm sorry girl, I cannot do it. And the other book that I DNF'd for the month was The Almost Nearly Perfect People by Michael Booth. And I was sent this for a review by Picador Publishing. You guys know I love nonfiction, so I was ridiculously excited to pick this up. And I still might come back to it. I'm not sure. I'll explain. Basically, though, this book is the author who, I believe he's English, but his wife is Danish, and so they were living in Denmark, and as I'm sure most people know, Denmark is consistently rated the happiest country on earth, and all of Scandinavia is considered just like this pinnacle of humanity, that they do everything right. But while the author was living in Denmark, he absolutely hated it there and could not wait to leave, even though it says here that he does still live there, so that's a little bit confusing. And so with this book, he goes through each of the Scandinavian or Nordic countries and kind of gives like an expose of sorts and telling the truth about these countries and some of the more negative aspects that do not get reported, which again is very interesting to me. I want to see a nuanced view of a country, but also I never thought they were actually perfect, but obviously in relation to all of the other countries in the world, they would still be near the top. But my biggest problem is the fact that while reading it, which I did only get through the Denmark section, is that I could feel his bias, and he was trying to almost tell the reader what to think instead of just giving the information and letting it speak for itself. And I just kept thinking about the fact that I used to live in Dubai, and if someone asked me my opinion on the city or the UAE as a whole, I would have a pretty negative view of it because it was not the city for me. You know, you could get a million people who would say it's sunny every day and there's beaches everywhere and you don't pay taxes, it's an amazing city to live in, but for a book nerd, homebody introvert like me, I did not enjoy living there. And yes, there are genuine problems with the country, like having to give 2 mandatory blood tests in order to get a residence visa. But most of that comes from my own bias, which is again how I felt about the author reading this, though the reason that I said it is a technical DNF is because I think I might try to read about some of the other countries. Maybe he's not so bitter because he didn't live in the other Scandinavian countries. So that is it for all of the books that I read in the month of May, and I'm kind of reminded of the Poptimist who just did a video called Don't Call It a Slump, which was just amazing. Please go watch it. But he was talking about how everything he had read that month was solidly good and he could recommend it to people, but nothing absolutely blew him away, which is kind of how I felt about the books that I read this month, which is totally fine. It was not a terrible reading month, but I would love to hear from you guys if you have read any of these books, and please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!